Hello, this is Molly Creech, and I'm here with Miss Stephanie Pennington.
Hello.
We are at Corbin Middle School, and she is the guidance counselor here at the middle school. And she's allowed me to work with her just to get some information about my ESL student that I've been analyzing for this class. We are calling him Hobart. Okay, Hobart is 13 years old, in 8th grade here at the middle school, and his native language is English. He actually transferred here from Fayette County, and according to his records, he was born in Kentucky. But he does still qualify for ESL accommodations, such as extended time, simplified language, visual organizers, a scribe, a reader, and prompting and cueing. So with all that information, what I'd like to do is just discuss some writing and speaking samples that I was able to get from Hobart, and then talk about why it's important to even know about the student's heritage language, and then what teachers can do from there. So when I first started talking with Ms. Pennington, one of the first things she told me was how much he's improved between his 5th and 6th grade years up into middle school. So Ms. Pennington, if you wouldn't mind just talking about some of that.
Yes, especially his on his access scores, it has indicated that he has had tremendous growth in every area. His speaking is amazing. His writing is a little to be desired, but we're working on that with him. But I think through this program and through each and every step that we go through, he will excel, and he will come out of this program.
Yeah, and I think you'll definitely see that when you listen to the video that I attach of him reading, and then I also can show you some writing samples. And based on the information I got from his access scores and his growth, I think he is right in between the developing and expanding levels of English language proficiency. So for him, his can-do describers would be that he can work on matching main ideas, starting the next event in a series based on clues. And I have talked with, what is the lady's name that he goes to see? He does specifically with writing and stuff. Miss
Humphrey?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's where I got some of his writing samples from. Mm-hmm. And she does say that she, when it comes to just information, she does kind of have to work and prompt and cue and things like that.
Yes.
Just to help him understand the connections and stuff. So that's something he still needs to work on, and relating a series of events, identifying topic sentences, and producing short paragraphs. It seems that in her class, that's just producing those short sentences, short responses. Like that's one main thing they're working on. So like I said, and I'll talk about his writing and speaking here in a second, but like I said, his native language is Spanish. His mother speaks just Spanish, and he has an older brother in high school, and Miss Pennington works with his older brother to help get information to the mom and get things signed that need to be signed. So with Spanish, there's obviously any student that's taken Spanish, any native English speaker that's taken Spanish in middle school, elementary school, high school, they can sometimes see some similarities between the two. They have some similar cognates, the way we spell it in English. And the meaning a lot of times is the same thing in Spanish, just spelled a little differently. Another thing, they have similar Latin roots. One of the great ways for a Spanish speaker or English speaker, one of the two, to kind of better understand the other language is just find those connections between the Latin roots. But sometimes that can be a little bit of a hindrance. Sometimes a word that's spelled the same in English does not actually mean the same thing in Spanish. For example, sopa in Spanish does not mean soap, it means soup. Okay, and like ropa refers to clothes, whereas maybe an English speaker thinks it means rope. Not the same thing. There's also some syntax differences, and I think this might attribute to some of Hobart's challenges when it comes to syntax. When it comes to writing or asking questions in Spanish, embedded questions, inversion with the subject and the verb is required. They automatically switch it. Whereas sometimes with English that doesn't happen. There's 5 million different ways you can say it in English, and especially my textbook, they talk about that a lot. There's different ways that it works with English, but in Spanish, it's just one way you do it. Also, adjectives in Spanish do not necessarily come before the noun. Sometimes they come after it. So sometimes for a Spanish speaker, identifying when if they have to do grammar practices in English, that can be a little difficult for them, identifying the adjective based on where it is in the sentence. But what I want to talk about next, before we talk about just specific teacher things, I want to indicate Hobart's reading and writing samples. His reading, when you hear his reading, is very, very good at reading. His fluency, he's not speaking exactly at as fast as rate as maybe a native English speaker, but he's getting there. The big thing I noticed, and Mrs. Pennington seemed to agree, was and several students, whether they're native or not, they don't pause between sentences, especially when the word because or and begins a sentence. Sometimes they automatically think, oh, I don't pause. That's a conjunction. I can keep going. But you'll notice that with Hobart's reading, he does not pause very often between sentences. And there were a couple just what was the word? Like network. He read the word network and he pronounced it neckwork.
Yes.
So, and sometimes we do that. We see the ending letter and we automatically put it in the middle of the word. So that wasn't too bad. But very good speaking level, pronunciation, things like that. His writing, like I was talking about earlier, with syntax. The two things I noticed was just subject and verb agreement when it comes to plural versus singular, and then again with questions, answering questions specifically. So the first thing, I know this is going to be weird. I did it last time. Can you get it? Yeah, that's not going to work. Anyway, so one of his answers, like I said, was singular versus plural. His answer to one of these questions is, yes, wildfires are common because people makes campfire and it start on fire. So he needed to say people. He should have considered that plural and then said people make. Okay. And then and it start on fire. It should have been it starts on fire. So you've got a combination of a plural word, but he uses a singular verb, and then a singular word, and he uses a plural verb. So some practice with that would need to be used. And then the answer to one of his questions that he gave, he said, they use is a controlled verb. He could have said it two other ways. He could have said what they use is, or they use. So little confusion with what verbs to use. So that would just be good practice there. Now, Miss Pennington is just wonderful with keeping her records and everything, and just her, relationship with Hobart and other ESL students here. So I think there's a lot of things that she would agree with when it comes to why it's important for a teacher to know the heritage language. Could you, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but is there one thing like you would definitely say why it's important to know the heritage language about it, maybe?
Well, I think you're exactly right when you talk about the way that they read their native language, the way they understand their native language, and then versus the way that we speak our native language and we read our native language. It's very important for teachers to understand where that comes from, because all over the world is completely different. Mm-hmm. And, and I'm sitting here as we're talking and I'm looking at his scores. And through his writing over the years, he's still in the developing stages, which tells me that, but however, his speaking and his reading have moved to the expanding stage, which tells me that he's understanding more. It's putting it down on paper that he's having difficult understanding. And again, that goes back from the native language being different all over the world, and you have to kind of understand, maybe that's how they understand and they write as well.
Right.
And that's one thing that I try to make sure that our teachers know exactly what is their native language and where it comes from.
Yes, definitely. And then some other things that I just mentioned in my paper, like when you hear, now I didn't really hear it when Hobart was reading, but sometimes they inflect certain phonemes that we don't inflect. So if the teacher thinks, why are they reading that weird? Well, there's a reason. But things like that. And again, honestly, also with their heritage language kind of goes with their background language, like background experience. A word or expression in their language may mean something different than it does in ours. So basically for a teacher, a native English teacher that has ESL students, it pretty much helps us understand why they're saying it this way, what they mean, and all that. Kind of helps us better form a relationship instead of making assumptions. Now, in regards to recommendations for teachers when it comes to reading and writing, I take an acquisition view versus learning view, and what that means is when it comes to teaching ESL students, I really think that both academic language, social and academic language need to be taught together. As we're learning content, we're also learning the language. Because what I've read in my textbooks over and over again is a student may do wonderful in conversation and they understand what somebody's saying, but then once they read a textbook, the same words, they have no idea what it is. So, or they struggle with that. So that's one thing. So again, I think just content and language just all need to go together. Some activities you can do that with, specifically focusing on vocabulary, is front loading, where the vocabulary is basically taught ahead of time. Students relate it to what they've already experienced. This is a great thing for ESL students. Relate it to what they've already experienced, and then find out how their understanding of that word maybe gets to stay the same, or maybe it needs to change some. Prediction, especially with young children, prediction can be done through guided reading, where the students flip through a picture book and try to predict what's supposed to happen, what's going to happen, picture by picture, and then they find out what really does happen, whether it's the same or not. With older students like Hobart, they can do that with titles and subheadings. This title says this, so what do you think it's going to talk about? That's a great way to do it. Rhymes, whether with younger or older students, rhymes are a great way to help students learn language words and become familiar with the relationships between sounds and phonemes, morphemes, all that. With writing, definitely need to connect writing with content. Give them a reason to write stuff. Give them a reason to write about things, not just as busy work. One way that works is close passages, close with a Z. This is a great way for them to, again, use vocabulary in their writing, or work with grammar, fill in correct verbs, fill in correct subjects, or use vocabulary words. So basically it's just one of those fill in the blank things. But then if you put that in the context of content, like let's say the paragraph has something to do with science or has something to do with language arts, there you go. That's what that is. Sentence frames. I really like sentence frames. That's where you basically give the student a prompt to start writing from or to speak from, and that helps them use that language in the content and in context. And then also sentence combining activity. That's something new that I've learned this year in my book. So when I become a language arts teacher, we'll see how that works. But there's always different ways to combine sentences to make them more complex. And this is definitely good for students like Hobart who are about to go into high school and write more complex sentences. So teaching them all the different ways you can combine sentences, and it still works. So that's really good. So I hope this has been very informative for us future ESL teachers when it comes to analyzing students' writing and speaking, and then taking that, matching it with their can-do descriptors, and then going from there to figure out research-based strategies that we can use to help accommodate them in their reading and writing for now and for the future. So thank you, Ms. Pennington, for all your help, and you all keep going with that class.